I've lived in the same house in Marietta, Georgia for about 6 years now. It's a quiet suburb, the kind of neighborhood where people wave from their driveways and leave Amazon packages on each other's porches when UPS drops them at the wrong address. My backyard isn't anything special. Maybe 40 feet deep, wooden privacy fence on 3 sides, a detached garage at the back left corner, and a big oak tree that drops acorns on my roof every fall like it's personally got something against me. I got divorced in 2021, so it's just me and my dog, a 7-year-old lab mix named Cutter, rattling around in a house that used to feel full. I work remote, doing IT support for a logistics company, so I'm home most of the time. That part matters later. I want to be clear about something before I get into this. I'm not a dramatic person. I don't spiral. My ex-wife would tell you I'm actually borderline dismissive about anything she'd call a bad vibe. So when I say something felt off, I need you to understand that it took a lot before I admitted that to myself. It started in early March of last year. Nothing alarming, nothing that would make you call the cops. Just a few small things that, on their own, I would have explained away without a second thought. Taken together, though, they paint a picture that I still think about when I let Cutter out at night and stand in my doorway watching the dark corners of my yard. I think about it every single time. The first thing I noticed was the garage door. I keep the detached garage mostly locked. There's a side door that faces the back of the yard, and I always close the padlock on it. It's just habit. I've got a riding mower, some tools, a chest freezer full of venison from a hunting trip 2 years ago. Nothing worth a fortune, but enough that I don't want to advertise an open door. One morning I walked out to grab the mower, early March, unseasonably warm, and the padlock was hanging open on the latch. Not broken, not missing, just open, like someone had the combination, which is 4 digits, which I'd never told anyone. I stood there for a solid 30 seconds trying to reconstruct the night before. Did I go in for something and forget to lock it? I walked through every step I could remember. I didn't think I had, but I also couldn't be 100% sure. I went inside, noted it mentally, and moved on. 3 days later, Cutter started acting strange at night. He's an easy dog. Calm. He sleeps at the foot of my bed and doesn't bark at much. But around 10:30 that Thursday, he went to the back sliding glass door and just stood there, stiff, staring into the yard. Not barking, not whining, just locked in, every muscle in his body rigid, nose low against the glass. I got up and looked over his shoulder. The yard was dark. Motion light above the garage wasn't on. Nothing looked wrong. I tapped his shoulder and told him to relax. He stood at that door for another 20 minutes before he came back to the bedroom. I lay there in the dark thinking about the padlock. 2 nights after that, I woke up at 2 a.m. for no clear reason. I've always been a light sleeper, but I don't usually wake up without cause. I lay there for a minute, disoriented, and then I heard it. A sound from outside that was hard to categorize. Not loud, not close. It was like a slow, deliberate scrape. Metal on concrete, maybe. Like something being dragged, just slightly, and then stopping. I got up and looked out the bedroom window, which faces the side yard. Motion light still off. I couldn't see anything. The sound didn't repeat. I told myself it was a raccoon knocking something over in the garage, went back to bed, and stared at the ceiling for an hour. That's when I ordered the security cameras. I went with a 4-camera system, wireless, with night vision and motion alerts sent to my phone. I put 2 in the front, 1 covering the side gate, and 1 angled to cover the full back of the yard, including the garage. I set everything up on a Saturday afternoon, tested the app, confirmed the motion zones, and felt the specific satisfaction of a person who has solved a problem. Cutter sat in the yard and watched me climb the ladder like he was supervising. That Saturday night, nothing. Sunday night, nothing. I started to think the lock thing really had just been my mistake, and Cutter was maybe reacting to an animal. Monday night, at 12:47 a.m., my phone buzzed. Motion alert. Backyard camera. I picked it up half asleep and opened the clip. The night vision footage showed the yard in that familiar greenish-white glow. The oak tree, the fence line, the corner of the garage. I watched for a few seconds and didn't see anything. I figured a leaf had blown through the detection zone and was about to close the app when I noticed the gate in the back left corner of the fence. A small wooden gate I never use, almost hidden behind a row of overgrown arborvitae. It was slightly open, maybe 6 inches, not wide, just cracked. I stared at that gap for a long time. Then I backed the footage up to the beginning of the clip, turned the brightness all the way up on my phone and watched it from the start. At the 2-second mark, in the deep shadow along the fence line near the arborvitae, something moved. I couldn't make out a clear shape. It was more like the shadows shifted and then settled differently. But the gate was closed at the start of the clip, and it was open at the end of it. I sat up in bed with my heart going faster than I wanted to admit. I went through every clip from the previous nights. Tuesday through Sunday, nothing. But when I went back further, 2 before I'd installed the cameras, obviously nothing there. But I checked the timeline and realized the gap in the fence gate was something I had never once noticed before. I didn't even know that gate would open anymore. It had been overgrown for years. I had assumed it was permanently stuck. Someone had cleared it enough to use it. I called my neighbor Dave the next morning. He lives behind me, and his yard backs up to mine across that fence line. I asked him casually if he'd seen anyone messing around the alley that runs behind our properties. He said no, but he'd noticed something a few weeks back. A car parked in the alley for several hours, 3 nights in a row. Not an unusual car. Dark sedan. He hadn't thought much of it. I didn't say anything to him about the camera footage. I just thanked him and hung up. That night, I pulled up the app and watched the live feed before bed. Nothing. 1 a.m., nothing. 2 a.m., nothing. I finally fell asleep around 2:30. At 4:18 a.m., 3 alerts fired in sequence. The first clip, gate opening again, same spot. The second clip, a figure walking along the fence line toward the garage. Clear as day on the night vision. A person, not a large person. Medium height, dark jacket, hood up, moving slowly, close to the fence, like they were trying to stay out of the center of the yard. Like they knew where the motion light sensor was, which they could only know if they'd been there before when it was on. The third clip, the side door of the garage, pulling open. They had the combination. I was sitting on the edge of my bed watching this with my hand literally shaking. This person was in my garage right now. I called 911 and gave them my address and told them someone was in my detached garage. The dispatcher told me to stay inside and not confront them, which was not an instruction I needed because I had no intention of going out there. The police arrived in about 6 minutes. They found the garage empty. The figure had left before they arrived, back through the same gate. But here's what they found inside. In the back corner of the garage, behind my chest freezer, there was a sleeping bag. A rolled sleeping bag, a small backpack, a water bottle, and a grocery bag with food in it. Crackers, a jar of peanut butter, some granola bars. Everything arranged neatly against the wall like a campsite. Someone hadn't just been entering my garage. Someone had been living in it. The detective who came out the next morning told me they'd encountered this before. People in housing crises who find unlocked or accessible outbuildings and use them to shelter. He said it was almost never violent. He said the person had probably been watching the house long enough to learn my schedule, the motion light position, the padlock combination, possibly by watching me enter it during the day from somewhere along the fence line. I asked him how long it had been going on. He looked at the sleeping bag and the level of food and said, conservatively, several weeks. Several weeks. While I was 20 feet away in my house, eating dinner, watching TV, going to sleep, someone was in my garage, knowing my schedule, knowing my combination, having cleared that back gate without me ever noticing. They never identified who it was. No prints that returned a match. The car Dave described was never located. I installed a new padlock. I put 2 more cameras along the fence. I trimmed the arborvitae all the way down so there's no cover along that wall. Cutter still goes to the back door sometimes at night and stands there, completely still, staring at the garage. I tell myself it's a habit he hasn't broken yet. I'm not entirely sure I believe that. My wife and I bought our house in Sacramento, California in 2019, a 2-story place in a neighborhood called Tahoe Park, which is older, established, the kind of area where the trees are big and the lots are narrow and you can hear your neighbors through the fence without really trying. Our backyard is small by most standards, maybe 30 feet wide, 60 feet long, with a wooden fence that's seen better days, a small patio, a raised garden bed my wife uses for tomatoes every summer, and a storage shed in the back right corner that came with the house. We have 2 kids, a daughter who was 9 at the time and a son who was 6. I'm a high school history teacher. My wife works in HR for a tech company, fully remote. We are thoroughly, aggressively ordinary people. I want to establish that. We're not the kind of people things happen to. Or we weren't. This started the summer of 2022 and went on for nearly 2 months before we understood what we were actually dealing with. The first sign was the tomatoes. My wife had planted 6 tomato plants in late April. Her annual thing, she loves it. It's one of those routines she guards. She goes out every morning with her coffee and checks on them, waters, ties up the vines. In late June, she came inside with this puzzled look and told me that 3 of the plants looked like they'd been touched. Not eaten by animals, not damaged by weather, but the wire cages she'd installed around 2 of them had been moved slightly, and one of the support stakes had been repositioned, pushed in at a different angle. She thought maybe the kids had been out there, but our kids never went in the garden. It was kind of an unspoken house rule. I asked the kids. They hadn't been in it. I figured the wind had somehow moved things, or my wife was misremembering the layout. She was skeptical, but let it go. A week later, she told me the stepping stones on the left side of the yard, a little path she'd laid from the patio to the back fence, had been disturbed. 2 of them had been shifted. Not dramatically, maybe an inch or 2 each. But she'd laid those stones herself and she knew their positions. She said it felt like someone had walked across them in the dark and shifted them without realizing it. I went outside and looked at the path and the stones and I thought, this woman is working 60-hour weeks from home and she's hyper-focusing on her garden as her outlet. And maybe she's getting a little too in her head about it. I didn't say that, but I thought it. 2 weeks after that, I stopped thinking it. I was up late on a Wednesday, maybe 11:30, doing some end-of-year grading at the kitchen table, which has a window that faces the side yard. The outdoor light above the back patio was on. We keep it on a timer. I wasn't really looking outside, but I was facing that direction, and at some point I registered movement in my peripheral vision and my head turned automatically. There was a man standing at the back fence. Just standing there. On the inside of the fence, near the shed, mostly in shadow but partially lit by the patio light. He wasn't moving. He was facing the house. I couldn't make out features. He was too far and the light angle was wrong. But he was clearly a person. Adult, standing still. My brain did that thing where it races through explanations. A neighbor who came through somehow? A friend playing some kind of stupid prank? For about 4 seconds, I just stared at him and he stared at the house. And then the patio light's timer shut it off and he was gone into the darkness. I sat there for a moment, then went to the back sliding door and turned on the exterior floodlight. The yard was empty. I stood there looking at the fence, the shed, the corners. Nothing. I opened the door and called out. Nothing clever, just, "Hey." No response. I didn't go outside. I locked the door, checked the front door, checked the side gate latch. I didn't sleep well that night, and in the morning I almost convinced myself I'd imagined it. Almost. I told my wife at breakfast. She put her coffee mug down very carefully and looked at me and said quietly, "I knew something was wrong." We ordered cameras that weekend. Same type as I'd seen recommended online. Night vision, motion alerts, phone app. I put one on the back of the house covering the full yard, one on the side gate, one covering the front. I checked the shed, which had a basic padlock on it, found it secure. For the first week, nothing came through on the alerts at night. I started loosening up. Maybe it had been a one-time thing, a transient who'd climbed the fence and moved on when I turned on the light. Then, on a Saturday morning, I went to do some work in the shed. I unlocked the padlock, pulled the door open, and stood in the entrance, just frozen. Everything in the shed was in order. But on the small wooden shelf along the right wall, where I keep extra paint cans, there was an empty coffee cup. A styrofoam cup, the kind from a gas station or a diner. It wasn't mine. I had never put a styrofoam coffee cup in my shed. I put on a work glove, picked it up, looked inside. Dried residue. It hadn't been there long, no dust on it. Someone had been in the shed and had their coffee. I went back inside immediately, told my wife, and we went through the camera footage frame by frame from the past week. On Thursday night at 1:51 a.m., there was a motion clip. The night vision showed the back fence, the shed. A figure climbed over the left side of the fence, dropped into the yard, and walked directly to the shed like they knew exactly where they were going. They were inside for 11 minutes. They climbed back over the fence and were gone. Their movement was casual. That's what disturbed me most. There was no hesitation, no looking around, no checking if anyone was watching. They moved through our backyard with the ease of someone who had done it many times. We reviewed every clip going back to the day we installed the cameras. We found 4 separate incidents in 9 days that we'd missed because they happened during hours we weren't checking alerts. Same figure, same fence spot, same shed. On 2 of the clips, they appeared to be looking at the back of the house for several minutes before leaving. My wife and I sat at the kitchen table after putting the kids to bed, and she said, in a very flat voice, "They're watching the house to see when the lights go off." She was right. On all 4 clips, the person appeared within an hour of the upstairs lights going dark. I called the police and filed a report. An officer came and took the footage seriously, noted the shed entry as criminal trespass, took the coffee cup as potential evidence. He also told us something that I turned over in my mind for days afterward. The fence board on the left side, where the person climbed over each time, showed repeated scoring on the top edge. Not fresh marks. Worn, smooth marks. Like someone had been using that exact spot as an entry point for a long time, possibly long before we owned the house. The previous owners had lived there for 12 years. Over the next 3 weeks, we had 2 more visits caught on camera, both after midnight, both following the same lights-out pattern. On the second one, the figure didn't go to the shed. They came almost to the patio. They stood maybe 15 feet from our back door for 4 minutes and then left. The police stepped up patrols. We got a dog. Fast decision, but we got one. We put a new reinforced lock on the shed and a secondary latch on the gate. The visits stopped. Then, in late August, our neighbor 2 houses down, a retired woman named Patricia, knocked on our door. She said she'd seen our patrol situation, heard through the neighborhood that we'd been having issues, and wanted to tell us something. She said that a few years back, before we bought the house, she used to occasionally see a man standing in the alley behind the properties at night. She'd assumed he lived nearby. She said she hadn't thought about it in years. She described him as medium height, always in dark clothing, always just standing there looking toward the back of our house. That was the first time I felt actually cold in the middle of a Sacramento summer. We never identified him. The activity stopped, the police never made contact with anyone, and we have never found out who it was or why our house was the one he chose. My wife still goes out for her morning coffee in the garden, but she doesn't go out after dark anymore. Neither do I.